So I was going to talk about the fates of Indian spirituality, particularly in the West, and its assimilation here. So in speaking about the entry of Indian spirituality in the West, I see three waves, each with its own legacies, the temporal, historical waves. The first one is early modernity, from the late 18th to the mid-19th century, which saw the birth of Indology in Germany. Now, as we know, this led to the search for Aryan roots, or Aryan origins, with some disastrous effects. But it also led to transcendentalist ideas that can be traced from the German transcendentalists to the English Romantics and to the American transcendentalists. The second and more recent wave is from the late 19th to the mid-20th century, which actually coincides with the phase of what we may call Indian nationalism, and with its landmark event in the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago in 1893, with the talks and travels of Vivekananda and others who brought Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain ideas to America. This phase has to be understood in the context of early Indian nationalism, and particularly what has been called the Bengal Renaissance. The Bengal Renaissance is a phase of cultural politics which led to state politics. We were talking about cultural politics and its braided nature with state politics, anti-colonial state politics. It forms the inception of a colonial national interchange which is with us even today. This is not something that has got over when we got freedom. We are still in the middle of this colonial national interchange. Thinkers of the Bengal Renaissance run the spectrum from internal reformation to anti-colonial resistance. Arising in Calcutta, the capital of British activities in India from 1772 to 1911, it saw the rise of an intellectual elite which versed itself in English and the values of the Enlightenment and made this the basis of their critique of modernity, while accepting some of its key tenets. The principle of these tenets that it accepted was the equality of all human beings. But instead of basing this in the human reason, as in the Enlightenment, it saw this equality in the transcendental monist idea of Brahman, which has become all things and resides fully and equally in each of them. Based on this, it sought for a spiritual redefinition of human identity and articulations of universal spirituality. The influence of Bengali spiritual thinkers writing in English during this period, such as Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, and to some degree Swami Yogananda, who came to America in 1920, combined with the legacies of American transcendentalism, led to the varieties of modern perennialism, which is one of the principal strands of contemporary New Age thought. Among the most significant meetings of Vivekananda's visits to the US must be counted his encounters with William James. It may not be too far-fetched to think of these meetings as laying the seeds of modern academic consciousness studies and transpersonal psychology. The end of the Second World War saw the beginning of a post-colonial phase in India and a spiritual deflation in the West, leading to the last resurgence of this phase. The arrival of Haridas Chaudhuri to San Francisco and the founding of the American Academy of Asian Studies in 1950 can be seen as part of this phase. The birth of modern physical yoga in India can also be traced to this phase, to this nationalist phase. It is significant that the formators of this kind of yoga were all nationalists, invested in the idea of building a body of resistance as an aspect of anti-colonial biopolitics. From this we move to the third wave of entry of Indian spiritual thought, which is the period we are talking about, the 1960s. From the 1960s, with aggressive American involvement in Asian geopolitics, about which we heard a little bit just earlier, in the name of a global balance of power, the post-World War spiritual disillusionment deepened, leading to the phenomenon of a counterculture, which could be said to peak around 1968. The early phase of this saw the migration of the hippies to India. The hippies in India sought a return to the primitive, combined with the spiritual rhetoric of fraternity. A best-selling book titled Karma Kola, written by Geeta Mehta and published in 1979, captures well the effect of the incursion of hippies in India during this period. As the title suggests, it saw the close braiding of half-digested Indian spiritual ideas with corporate pop capitalism. It also suggests the formation of new subcultural languages. It's not a kind of, these are all ambiguous things, that it has two sides. The formation of new subcultural languages capable of voicing new lifestyles. The aftermath of this incursion saw the reciprocal entry of Indian gurus to the US. These new teachers multiplied the diversity of Indian teachings in a bewildering array of sects and cults. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi began traveling to the West from 1960. Sri Chinmoy moved to the US in 1964. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada came in 1965. Muktananda in 1970. These are only a few prominent names among many who gave birth to what has been called the modern guru industry. At the peak of this movement, both CIIS, the California Institute of Asian Studies, which was the original name of CIIS, and Auroville in India were founded. This post-colonial wave of Indian spirituality introduced new characteristics which sat uneasily or paradoxically with the values of post-enlightenment modernity, and which are with us to this day. These may be enumerated as a set of aporias. An aporia, for those who don't know, is a kind of a paradox that arises out of the collision, a dead-ended collision of two worldviews. A, sectarian aporia. Each of these teachers became the center of a personality cult and a sectarian claimant participating in the politics of truth. Now, the politics of truth is not something new. It's something that has been going on in India for ages. Each group claims its own right, hegemonic right, as the truth. And people who enter it are usually not allowed to look outside because they're given their version of what it is. This challenges the modern tenet of pluralism and obscures a clear understanding of the total possibilities of spirituality. B, hierarchical aporia. Founded on a strong distinction between guru and disciple in terms of power and truth, this challenges the basic enlightenment tenet of the equality of all humans and succumbs frequently to the abuses of power. C, sexual aporia. Often celibate in their origins, or as in forms of tantra, using sex as a means to the transcendence of desire, yet operating in a countercultural environment of sexual freedom, the leaders of these sects often became the perpetrators of sexual abuse. D, materialist aporia. Transcendentalist and reclusive in their origins, yet operating in a materialistic environment, leaders of these sects often succumb to the lures of materialism. E, existential aporia. Once again, belonging to the peripheries of society, but now catering to the existential needs of a modern mainstream, these sects and their leaders often lacked the ethical and creative resources of life integration. F, political aporia. Though as we saw, modern Indian spirituality has been a bedfellow of politics from the nationalist period. While the politics of the Bengal Renaissance maintained a modernist pluralism, the new spiritual politics is increasingly ethnocentric, lending itself to the designs of ultra-right nationalism. Yet, new guru sects with even more of a personality cult orientation and even less of a teaching are in our midst today. On the other hand, the very use and meaning of the word yoga has been reduced to the burgeoning ends of the fitness industry. In conclusion, the futures of Indian spirituality, as represented by the wave of modern gurus starting from the 1960s, has floundered on the rocks of modernist ethics and jurisdiction. Among all these futures, beset by cultism, right-wing politics, and capitalism, the trajectories of Indian spirituality, if they are to fulfill the hopes invested in them by those who saw in them a positive contribution to the human or post-human future, must be recovered in settings which render them open to pluralist universal praxis. It is for this reason that I see the encounter of Vivekananda with William James as having an even greater significance for Indian spirituality than the latter's address at the Parliament of World Religions. The founding of CIIS, with its orientation towards a new kind of scholarship, marked by the dialogue of academics and spiritual practice, is a ray of hope in this direction. Scholar practitioners who can transform both academics and spirituality to the formation of new communities equally invested in both may open the way to the new sanghas of the post-human future. For this to flourish, the academic habitus must also change to one of lifelong learning and existential experimentation. Communities like Auroville may have something to teach us in this regard. Thank you.